When I was a kid, we had these terrific neighbors, Carl and Betty Valentine. They were an older couple. You couldn't have picked a better name than Valentine. They'd been married for 60 years, and they were still fond of each other. And he was quiet and modest, and she was a pistol. And I remember them always gardening. I didn't know much more about the Valentines except that he was a big shot at Safeway, where I think he'd been in charge of trucking. You know, when you're a kid, you don't ask about adults. I mean, they're cartoons in a way. They're just people whose clothes have gone out of style. And Mr. Valentine had this crazy gesture he used to do. When I'd leave my house early in the morning on my bike to go do my paper route, he'd give me one of these when I rode by. And one day my dad sent me over to borrow a hedge trimmer. And I knocked on the door, and Mrs. Valentine said, "Oh, Carl's out running an errand, but let's go see if we can find it in the garage." So we go down to the garage, and she unlocks this little room for me to check while she putters around outside. And I peek inside this room, and it was 4 walls of military decorations. Medals, citations, photos of him as part of Eisenhower's D-Day planning staff, and letters from Churchill and Charles de Gaulle. I guess the French had awarded him the Croix de Guerre. And he had been a really big deal in trucking and supply for D-Day and Patton's advance across Europe. And I was looking at a note that George Patton had written to Mr. Valentine, along with a picture of Patton watching a column of supply trucks roll by. And in the picture, General Patton was doing this. And the room was so immaculate and well-tended that it seemed pretty obvious to a 14-year-old that nobody would put a hedge trimmer in there. So when Mrs. Valentine asked if I'd found anything, I said, "Yeah, I found a few things." And she said, "Well, don't tell Carl." He was such a modest, soft-spoken, gentle man. It was hard to picture him ever raising his voice. In the trucking business, in the middle of a world war. I figured he was just too smart to be loud. But his greatest weapon was a pure heart. So, on this Veterans Day, I send you this from Carl Valentine.